Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. As you can see, I'm in Brisbane at Mum's place. I got away a little early this morning and managed to get here and spend the afternoon editing some videos and stuff. So I forgot to do an intro for the video that I'm editing, of course, and I think there's a couple more. So you'll have some weird intros that are done now at Mum's rather than on the property for stuff that happened at the property over the next few days. But anyway, so today's video that I just sorted out was making pizza sauce from that big box of tomatoes that we got from the Hamper. So I made a big pot of pizza sauce and canned it all up, and have given you some tips and tricks and the way that I do it and some information while I was doing it to share as well. I also canned up the other half of the apple butter barbecue that I had done. So that is in this video today as well. So check that out while I'm here in Brisbane doing all the shopping. And I purposely kept a few extras and then have obviously forgotten to do, I was doing voiceovers here and editing and then have forgotten to do the intros. So it's a little bit mishmash, but there you go, that's what happened. So enjoy watching, and I will get more done for you as well. Thanks guys. So today I had to get started on those tomatoes. So the tomatoes have been sitting in a box waiting to ripen up. There was a fair few green ones in that when Darryl had selected the tomatoes, because they were in the big crates. So it was sort of a help yourself thing from the Hamper. He had selected ones that were of a variety of ripeness. So we could eat a few to begin with, but we had plenty that were still ripening up to use. But I definitely needed to get moving on them. So what I did was I decided to make pizza sauce, because that's something that we have run out of on the shelf. We still have some pasta sauce on the shelf from the last batch I made, and those big tins of tomatoes that I buy from Costco are inexpensive to make that pasta sauce with. So I thought using the fresh tomatoes for pizza sauce would be really nice, because fresh tomatoes don't go that far. Like, you don't get that much out of fresh tomatoes. You feel like you're cutting up kilos and kilos of them, but once they're processed, they just don't go very far. So pizza sauce seems like a really good idea to make out of them. So what I do is I just rough chop them. All I do is take the cores out of the top. So I just chop them rough, take the bits of cores out. I don't peel or de-seed any of my tomatoes. I just puree it up. I don't find that it affects flavor. Some people don't like leaving the seeds in their tomatoes when they can it. They say it leaves like a bitter aftertaste. I have never found that. And yes, even when you blend it, the skin, sometimes you end up with those little, like, I don't know, stringy bits of skin, but it doesn't worry me. And there is a lot of goodness in the skin and just under the skin of tomatoes. If I'm going to peel them for something, like if it's something that I make that I really want to peel them with, then I will dehydrate the peels and turn it into tomato powder. But generally speaking, I just use the whole tomato. It's especially homegrown ones, like if you're going to all that effort to grow them and things like that, I just don't see the point in peeling or de-seeding them. But anyway, personal preference. So I just rough cut them up and stuck them into my cast iron trays. And then I add some onion. So I just chunk the onion up as well. You don't want it too small or it will burn before your tomatoes roast. So you just want it cut into rings basically and spread it through the tomato. You sort of want it lower than the tomato because, as I said, the onion will burn before the tomatoes cook. I normally drizzle it with a tiny bit of olive oil and put some salt on it, and then I stick it in the barbecue oven, smoker, whichever one I want. I have smoked them before. It is quite nice. Smoke flavour does get a little bit more, when you can it, but I haven't found it too overpowering in anything that I've made. Tomatoes don't seem to hold a lot of the smoke when you're smoking them, so it's not too bad. But this time I just did them in the barbecue. So I did 2 full trays of those in the barbecue. After that, I just roasted them till there was a bit of colour on them all, and then I used the Thermomix to puree them. So having the high impact blender like type tool, like having a good blender or a good food processor or something like that, also helps with the whole leaving the skins and stuff on. You can leave the cores in them as well, to be honest. It's all just tomato. It's habit really to pull them out, but with the Thermomix they really would just blend down anyway. So all I did was pureed them in the Thermomix and then did what I normally do, and that's sort of see the approximate amount of cups of liquid that came out of each jug of the Thermomix, and that's just so that I can assess how much of other ingredients I can add to it and still make it safe to can. So I just pour it into a cup before pouring it into a pot and have approximate amounts of how many cups of tomato liquid that I'm starting off with in my pot before I add all the other ingredients to it. Tomatoes themselves are a high acid food, so they don't actually need anything else to be safe, though a lot of the newer tomatoes aren't quite as acidic, so they suggest putting some citric acid or lemon juice into each jar. But it's the onion, and if you were to add things like capsicum and things like that, that are the low acid foods that will alter your canning times and stuff. So you need to know how much tomatoes in there so that you can only add a certain amount of those other ingredients to make it safe for water bath canning. If you're not concerned about water bathing it, if you want to pressure can it, you can add pretty much as much whatever you want, and then just make sure that you pressure can it for the appropriate times. I was just adding basic spices with this one. I just added some dried herbs like some thyme and some oregano. I don't generally add basil to my tomato sauces because I'm not a fan of what it tastes like after it's been canned. I would prefer to add fresh basil to my pizzas when it's that season, or just some dehydrated stuff over the top. I also added some tomato paste. It's completely optional. I had a jar on the shelf. It just thickens it up. So you can cook it down longer and it will thicken up for you, or you can add the tomato paste and it doesn't require as much cooking down and it thickens it up. So that way I'm getting more out of it, more jars out of it without the time cooking down. Personal preference as to how you want to do it. But I did add tomato paste and I added some garlic. I then just mixed it really well and brought it up to a simmer. So you just want to heat it up to temperature. You want to get it heated all the way through up to a simmer. You either then simmer it until it reaches the consistency you want. I didn't really need to because I put so much tomato paste in there that it didn't really need any simmering for texture. It was going to be the right texture straight away. But if you have watery tomatoes, these ones all seem to not be too bad actually, but if you've got really watery tomatoes, then you're going to have a lot of water that you want to cook down, especially if you're using it as a pizza sauce, not a pasta sauce. If you have too much water in it, not only will it not be very thick when you're putting it on your pizzas, but it'll separate when you can it, and on your shelf it'll have water below and the solids above, and you can just shake it and it works fine, but it's just not as pleasant to look at. So cooking that water out of it makes it look nicer on your shelves. I did add some salt and pepper, and you can add some sugar to taste. I think I added a tablespoon of brown sugar just to take the edge off the acidity of these, but it depends on your tomatoes and your taste buds and all that sort of thing. So that's personal preference. Taste it how you want. A little bit of Worcestershire is sometimes quite nice in it as well, and any other herbs that you want to use. Just obviously don't overuse them because it's going to affect your canning acidity. I filled my jars after that. Now, being pizza sauce, we do 8 pizzas at a time, 8 smallish pizzas at a time with 240 odd grams of dough. So one of these, the Aldi jam jars that I reuse a lot, or their molasses jars is the other jars here. So they're both around about the 350, 375 ml jars. I find that this gives me a good heaped tablespoon per pizza. And if I'm using things like the zucchini butter mixed through with the pizza sauce, which I do quite regularly, then you'd need even less. So I can make one of these jars stretch for 8 pizzas, so I tend to jar them in that size. So I filled all the jars. You want to make sure you've got a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch headspace. It's a fairly thick liquid. It's only being water bath canned though, but you want to make sure that there's at least a 1/4, but 1/2 is probably good in this sort of a consistency of liquid. And you want to clean your rims with white vinegar like normal. I did add a 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid to each of these jars as well. Not necessarily needed it, but better safe than sorry, and it's not going to impact the flavour of the sauce any. It's just going to bring the pH level correct to make sure that it's going to last on my shelves. This isn't going to, there's not very many jars here. It's not going to last us a huge amount of time anyway, but better to be safe than sorry. Cleaned all the rooms with the white vinegar, debubbled and all that sort of thing, and put the lids on. I also had to do the other half of the apple butter barbecue. So I had that other big container full of the apple butter that I had put in the fridge. So I measured that out and added all the same things that I did last time to make it apple butter barbecue, and cooked that down as well while I was doing everything else. It had been sitting on the stove. You might have glimpsed it at times during the beginning of the video. So it was just sitting on the stove, simmering and coming down to the right consistency while I was doing everything else. But I did it at the same time because I could fit all of it into my canner in a double stack. So I double stacked it in my canner like this. I had the trivet in the bottom, trivet in between, and rearranged the jars to the most efficient way possible. I did put so there's enough water in there that you want 1.5 inches above the top jar, and I said it last time too that when your canner's this full, you need to keep that water level above the top jar. So it's worth keeping an eye on it and adding a bit more boiling water if it looks like it's boiling down a little bit, because there's some taller jars in here and it's water bath canning. I did think about it afterwards. I probably could have just done a single layer and done the rest in the steam canner or something like that, but I didn't think about it at the time. So this is what I did, and then did the normal, brought it up to the boil, started the timer from 25 once it was boiling, and let it go. And then once it was done, we pulled it out, and then now I have 2 large batches of apple butter barbecue and a big batch of pizza sauce for the shelf. Thank you very much for watching again, guys, and I will see you again next time.